Hey guys, and welcome to the first in my Unity tutorial beginners series. This episode we're just going to set up Unity and I'll show you some of the basics. But by the end of this series I'm going to have shown you how to make a full 2D platformer within Unity, including scoring and menu systems and finishing levels. So let's just jump straight into it. So to start this project off, I'm going to presume you've downloaded the Unity Hub and you've installed Unity. Now, you can see what versions you've got by clicking installs here, although I'm just using the latest version. So to create a new project, you hit the blue new button in the top right, and this will give us a few options. Now we're going to select 2D, 3D is just a variation of the 2D, although nothing's really changed and you can just alter some settings to change between the two within Unity, and high definition and universal are completely different and we don't want to touch them yet. So let's set the name here. I'm calling this tutorial series and I've already got a folder set up where I'm going to save this to. And once that's set up, we can hit create and it's going to create our project. This might take a couple minutes, I'm going to skip it, so just wait for that to happen and it will open up Unity and we can begin there. So here we are within Unity and this is the basic setup for a new project. So we have the inspector on the right. That's going to show us any of our objects that we've clicked on. We have our main game view in the middle. In the left we have our hierarchy along with our project, and that's going to show us any of our objects that we can pull in, or it's going to show us all of our files that are linked to this project. And then finally we have the console down the bottom that we can use to give feedback on how our game is running. A few little notes: we have play, pause and step button across the top. If we play that, the game will play, but we have nothing so far in our scene. We have a pause button and that will obviously just pause the playing. We also have this game view here along with our scene view, and that will show us whatever our main camera is looking at. So each scene will have our main camera and our game will show that, so we can move it around. Just a couple hotkeys: if you middle click and hold, you can move the scene around. This is moving the scene, not the camera, and then just zoom in and out, and that's basically all you need to reorganize how you're looking around. So if we click on our camera, you'll see on the right we now have our options here. Transform will be attached to every object, and this will just show its location within the world. So these are all called components, and we can add loads of components to an object and it will affect how it plays. So the main camera has obviously a camera component, and to create new components we can right click over here on our hierarchy. So you can either create an empty and then add all the components to turn it into something, or these are almost prefabs and you can already create stuff with those components attached. So we're going to make a 2D object and a sprite. The sprite is basically just a game object within the world, and we can attach an image to it and it's almost just like a 2D object. So now we've got our first sprite. You'll see it just spawns with a sprite renderer, and that's the only difference compared to a normal object. If we were to just create an empty, and then you could add a sprite renderer here, and these two are essentially the same object now, but it's just easier to set up with that attached already. So I'm just going to rename this player. So this is going to work as our player. You'll see this little star next to the scene shows that we haven't saved, so you can either hit file, save, and it will just save the scene and make sure it's updated, or you can hit Ctrl S, will do that as well. Just be sure to do that every so often so you don't lose any progress in case Unity crashes. So first of all we need to import our artwork so we can apply it to this sprite renderer to show it. So I've gone ahead and created a few folders here. I believe you'll only have the scenes folder. I've created a scripts folder to save any scripts in any future episodes, although we're not going to be touching that today. A prefabs folder that we will be using today, and I'll show you how that works. And an artwork folder. So we're just going to go into the artwork folder. Now there's two ways to import files. Within our game folder, which if I get it up here, Absolute Beginners Tutorial Series Assets, and now this is the same folder as that artwork. Now if I open that, this is the same folder and we can just drag stuff into here, and then when we go back into Unity it'll appear here as well. The other option is to right click and you can import new asset or import packages if you want to import not just assets. So I've made this player PNG and this wooden platform that we're going to use, and I'm going to hit import for both of those, and now they're in my assets folder. And if we open up our folder within File Explorer, you'll also see they're in here as well. So these are just linked. Don't delete these metadatas because they interact with how Unity sees the file and how the settings are set up. Now, because both of these are going to be pixel art essentially, you need to do a few things to change how the settings are. So I'm going to change the pixels per unit to 32, but if you're not doing pixel art, you're just doing like cartoon or any other style, you don't need to do that. But I'd also recommend changing the filter mode to no point filter and then the compression to none. So now we have our two assets set up within the player. I'm going to click on the player and drag the player sprite onto that, and here we are with it in the game world now. Alternatively, if I did it with the wooden platform would be there. But this is going to be our player object. I think the size is okay, although you can scale however you want the size, but just remember, if it's not just a cube, if it's a person, it's going to distort the image. But for mine, 1 and 1 seems okay. Whilst we're at it, we're also going to create the platform here as well. So I just created a new sprite here. I'm going to call it platform, and I'm going to drag the wooden platform onto it. Now this platform's pretty small, so I'm maybe going to just double it up here. So now we've got it double the size, and our player should in the future be able to move onto it. Now these are just two generic objects that don't have any control as to how they move within the world, so if we hit play, they're just stationary there. Oh, one quick point. My camera background here is grey. If you click on main camera, you can go to background here and change the colour of it to whatever you want. I just like this grey colour and it's easier for the YouTube to set up like that. But feel free to change that to whichever colour background you want. I'm just going to go with this dark grey to go with everything else. So now our player is set up as a sprite, and so is our first platform, but they don't interact within the world. So we need to add some components to get them to interact. So the first component we're going to add are box colliders 2D. So if you hit add component and search for box collider 2D, here we go, and we can add that, and you'll see it automatically morphs to the shape of the player or object that you've got if they're a box. Now, if they're not a box, you'll want to add a polygon collider, and whilst ours morphs to the same shape, if you hit edit collider, you'll notice here you can make it any shape you want, and you can add new points and morph it around, say a player's head perfectly, and curve it around and make it fit your player properly. But because our player is just a box, we're just going to add a box. Ignore these errors when I remove it, it's just because I was still editing it. So now we have our box collider, and again you can hit the edit tool, but you can only change it as a box, you can't add new points to it. And a quick way to reset it, if you mess it up, you can remove the component and then re-add it and it'll reconnect to it. So I'm just going to do the same to the platform down here. And now they both have box colliders, so now they will be able to collide and stop at each other. But our player doesn't have any movement attached to it. There is no gravity within the world to pull him down. Now we don't add gravity to the world to pull every object down. This is object orientated scripting, and we attach individual scripts or components to the object to govern how the objects move themselves, not how the whole world moves. So if we add what's called a rigid body, and again these are all, we're adding 2D objects to all of these because we're 2D. If you were doing Unity 3D, you'd add 3D, and this just gives it essentially 2D physics. It adds gravity, as you can see here, and it adds different momentum and mass, and you can change all of this stuff. But this should be the basics. Now when we hit play, they both have colliders so they can collide. The player has gravity so it can fall, but because our platform doesn't have any gravity, it's not going to move, and our player should just drop onto it. So let's play that. And the player falls onto it. I'll quickly move that up further and reduce the gravity scale here to 0.25 just so it floats down slower and we can see that happen. And there we go. That's gravity happening with our basic objects. So now normally the next step would be to start building a player controller so we can move them around the platform. And that's going to be next episode. I'm just going to show you a few more little features of Unity this episode. Bing bong, ad break. Just a quick short note, please don't skip. I just released a game on Steam called Slime Sprint. If you check it out, that's the best way to help out the channel. I don't really expect people to buy it from here because I know lots of you are devs like me, but just go in there, giving it a look at and wishlisting it really helps out the channel. Sweet, thanks, back to the tutorial. Oh, links in the description. So to start with, over here on the hierarchy, you have two options next to all of our game objects. So you have a little eye and a little hand with a finger. So the little eye makes it so you don't see it in the game world. So it can be handy, like this camera overlay can get in the way. So we can hit the eye and it moves out the way and we can't see it anymore. Alternatively, the finger makes it so we can't accidentally click on the camera, but it can still be there. So now we can't click on the camera here within the scene, but it's still there and we can see the outline of it. And that applies to both of these. So the player, now we can't click on the player, and then you can make it so you can't click or see on them. And it can just help, like when layering a background, how to control how you work. But it's worth noting, you can click all of these on, but when you play the scene, it'll still all be here and play properly. These are just the editor mode ones. Alternatively, if you untick it in the top right after selecting it, that disables the object and that won't then play in the main game. So see, we disabled the camera and now there's no cameras to display. But when we enable it and run it back, that will now show it here. Another feature is called Prefabs, and it's essentially where you make an object and then copy it loads of times, and you can just change the base object and all of the copies change. So we're going to make a prefab out of this platform so we can put different platforms around. But if we ever want to change them all and add scripts to say let the player drop through them, I can add it to only one and they'll all update. So to do that, I've made this prefabs folder within our assets. And all we're going to do is open that up and drag the platform in. So this is now our prefab. And you'll see our platform is now blue up here, and that just shows it's connected to the prefab. So now any changes we make to this prefab will affect the platform in the real world or in the real game. So if we duplicate this platform a few times, change where they are, and then edit the prefab, you'll see they all change. The only thing that isn't changed is the transform, because each of these will have their individual transforms within the world. But you can also add components and it will affect how it works. But make sure you've got the prefab selected, not the actual in-game. If you edit any of these, you can alter it, but you'll notice you'll get this blue line next to it. Which one did I edit? Here. And that shows that it's different from the prefab. So if we change the scale, it's got the little blue line, and that shows that it's different from the prefab. So you got to be careful with that. You might not want to edit it, because then when you change the prefab's version of that factor, it won't change. So that if we set the scale to 2.4 here, that's different from the prefab, and then when we edit the prefab, that one won't update. You've individually set that to what you want, and the prefab won't override it. So you just got to be careful with that. Another point is when the game's playing, any changes you make to the scene or any of the objects won't be updated when you stop. So if we make this platform wider and then stop, the platform will be back to normal. So playtesting editing is only really used just to test features and mess about, but you don't actually want to do it to update the scene and build the scene. But you can use it to like test stuff and make sure like physics are working properly, like this. So what we can do as well to organize our scene better is you can almost make folders by just creating an empty game object. I'm going to call this platforms, and then I can drag all my platforms under that and minimize that. So now that's our platforms folder. And we could also potentially prefab that, and then when you drag that back out, it's going to have all of our platforms on it. But it's also worth mentioning when we change this prefab, they're going to change because they're prefabs within a prefab. So you can set up pretty elaborate prefabs. Another important factor of Unity 2D anyway is choosing what sprites show in front of each other. So by default here, you see our player shows behind these platforms. Now I believe that's because the player was created before the platforms were made. Now, you can't just reorganize the hierarchy on the left and the player show in front or behind any of these individual platforms. What you need to do is change on the sprite renderer method component on the right over here. We have additional settings, and under that, sorting layers and ordering layer. So the sorting layer is just groups of the orders. So say background is going to be behind player, which is going to be behind player. So I've gone ahead and set up these 5 options. I'd recommend you set up whatever you want for your number of sorting layers, but this is going to make it so background is the very back. That's going to be my graphics in the background, and then within that you can order stuff by changing the number. So if we I'll show you. If we put all of these under the background layer, you'll see our player is still behind, but if we change our player's order to 1, it's in front because this platform here is 0. So 1 is in front of 0. If we change the player to -1, then it will go behind, and if it's 0, it's going to be behind because it was created first. So really, I put my player on its own layer, and then I layer stuff behind or in front by sorting layer. You don't really want to have the player say order 10 and then just use the default and number everything in front or behind the player by numbers. It can be a lot more complicated, and this way we can group stuff a lot easier. So I'll put the player on that. I'm going to put all of these platforms, or we can just change the prefab for the platforms. I'm going to put them behind the player. So if we click on all these, yep, they've all updated to, oh no, see, so they haven't updated because I had already changed it to background. But if we change it to behind player, that will be the same as the prefab now, and it will update. So now the player will stay in front of them even when it's behind, and again, still all works. So I don't know if I explained that very well, but just sort out your layers from back to front, and then within those layers you can layer stuff by changing the number. We also have a way to tag certain objects. So I'm going to tag these platforms with the tag floor, and you can add a tag here and you can create your own tags. I just had one tag created. I'm going to create a new one called player. Okay, so it's not creating the player tag, I remember, because there's already a player tag, I believe. Yep, so default you get a player tag. We're going to tag these platforms to floor. Now we can just tag our prefab and all of these will update. So that's nice. So now these are all tagged as floor, and this just helps when we're scripting for the game. When the player's interacting with, and then you can just check tag floor. So when it's touching any of these, it can be touching just floor and not that individual platform. So you can just use tags to control it like that. And then again, player, if you ever need to find the player in the scene, you can just search for the tag player instead of looking for game objects. So it can just help organize the game. So you've got to be sure to organize that properly. So player, set the tag up and set the sorting layer up, and then all of our platforms. So that's the basics of Unity 2D for setting up a scene. Next episode we're going to do player movement, one-way platforms, so you can jump up 3 platforms and move around them. If you struggled with any of this, or you've got any questions, or I didn't explain it very well, drop a comment down below. I'll try and respond to them all. If you like this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications when the next one in the series comes out. And I'll catch you next time.